Okay. Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Douglas?
Doing just fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you. I'm glad you had me. Thank you.
So, are you primarily an author or are you primarily a teacher? What do you call yourself first?
Well, several years ago, I made a decision that kind of changed my life. I kept trying up until that point for most of my life to try to fit writing into my life. And I just hit a crossroads where I had so much to write, so many ideas that I said, okay, I either have to be a writer or I have to give it up. And I realized that these voices in my head were going to drive me crazy if I didn't get them out. So I made a really difficult choice to basically be a writer and fit everything else into that life. And as a musician, I'm sure you could probably understand that feeling or that sense that it's something you have to do, that you're driven to do.
Right.
And it's not really a choice or a hobby, and that's how you know the difference between being actually being a writer and being somebody who writes in a diary or something. It's like when you feel that it's something you have to do, that's how you know. And it's something I had to do. And so I committed to being a writer, and I fit everything else into my life. I started working nights. Then I started doing this thing where I got certified to teach online for English as a second language. And so now I teach English online and I write. And I'm a writer first, always. And I put that at the center of my life.
So, when did you make that decision to put writing as the priority for your life?
I'd like to say 2017, but it probably happened a little bit before then. The realization came a little bit before then that I had to do that. It probably came around 2016. And then when I moved to Asheville, that's when I actually like really implemented that. And that was in 2017. So I made the realization a little bit before I made that transition. And I decided that I think maybe it just coincided with making a big change in my life of moving from Houston to Asheville. When you move, you feel like you're starting a new chapter or whatever. And when I did that, I made that changeover and I put writing at the center of my life.
I know what you mean about moving and starting over with your life just because the move sort of clears your head and changes. It's like changing the channel on the TV. You start to see something different and you start to think different things. I moved all the way from Boston to Thailand in one move. So I got about as
I'm
far away as I could.
getting ready to go teach in China. So or I'm
Yeah.
trying to. So for a couple of years, and I'm hoping it will be a period of very creative and productive writing for me. But I'm planning on I'm trying to make that move to China so that I can teach over there for a couple of years, save up some money, and then I plan to pursue dual citizenship in the UK.
Yeah, once you, especially if you go to a country where it's English is not the primary language, it's very easy to switch your head into that creative mode because you just kind of tune out everything that's going on around you and you slip into that creative space very quickly. But when you're in a country where, when you're in the United States, where it's your country, everything that's around you, you know what it is, right? And so
Unless there's a pandemic. Unless there's a pandemic, and then you really don't have any choice. You're kind of enforced isolationism.
well, yes, I mean, that's true. But what I'm saying is that everything is familiar, even if you're alone. You turn the TV
Right.
on, it's familiar. You turn all your pictures on the walls, everything around you is familiar. But when you're in a foreign country where English is not the primary language, every little thing is strange. And
Right. It's
so,
not like you can just turn on the TV.
yeah. So you tend to get into that creative space with your head. At least for me, that's how it worked.
Yeah, no, I've been to 24 countries, or I'm sorry, 25 countries, four continents. I've traveled to 35 of the U.S. states and lived in eight of them. So I get what you're saying. And anytime that you make a change, anytime that you move or you make a change, um, I know people who like wait until the last minute to go to the airport. I'm there like hours ahead of time because it's like I'd rather sit at the gate and just know that I'm through all of it. And I'm very comfortable traveling. I'm very comfortable in the airports. I'm very comfortable in other countries. I think the biggest part for me, the worst thing in traveling that I've ever done is I know a lot of different languages enough to get by.
Yeah.
Probably, I think nine different languages enough to get by in them.
Wow.
And the biggest thing for me was I went through the Rosetta Stone first course in Russian when I was visiting the Ukraine, sorry, not the Ukraine. When I was visiting Ukraine in 2015, I went through the entire Rosetta Stone course, the first course, and I was so proud of myself because I listened to all the DVDs and had been in the car listening and practicing and everything. So I felt really good about my knowledge of being able to speak it well enough to get around. But when I got there, I realized what a huge mistake I had made because it was the first time I had visited a country where the alphabet was different. And I had made no effort to learn how to read Russian. And I got there and I had no clue what it was. I was illiterate. I was like, oh my God, you know, and I know that's a pretty big thing to space out about, especially when you've traveled a lot. But I mean, it was just, I was so focused on learning enough to get around speaking that I totally forgot to learn.
I know what you mean, but I think you were smart to learn how to speak first. You can get by without reading.
But it's not as easy as you think it's going to be.
Well, you may
Like
have to
going,
have somebody, help you read something, but I think I would opt for the speaking first because otherwise, if you learned how to read and write, you'd have to write everything down to communicate. And I think that would be more problematic. I don't know. For me, it would be.
I don't know. I think that they're both very important elements to communication, especially if you don't speak the language fluently. If you just know enough to get around, it's very hard to ask specific questions like on schedules or whatever. Like I flew in and I needed to get to a train station. I needed to hit a certain train that I had to take a bus. It was very difficult. So I was very fortunate. I found a student that spoke fluent English and was able to help me out. But then he had to run to go catch his train. So it was not as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Well, let's transition over to your books. So, how many books do you have out at this point?
Well, I've got 4 books, and one of them is sort of a cheat because it's an anthology. It's a short story, the first chapter of a book that I'm writing as an introduction to it, and then a novella. And then the other book that I have is a children's book, and that's actually in January and March. It hit the bestseller list, the top 10 bestseller list in the US and the UK in January, and then in Japan in March. So, yeah, so that one, I have to tell you, I'm a little embarrassed by admitting this, but I've always considered myself a fantasy author, and I did the children's picture book Fable just because it was something I've always wanted to do for my daughter. And I thought, well, I've got a few good ideas for children's books. I'll go ahead and I'll put that in a children's book. But I've hit the bestseller list in more countries for my fantasy stories, but the children's book has actually done better in the rankings in the English speaking countries. And I was kind of upset about that. I'm like, I'm not a children's book author. I'm a fantasy writer. This is just something I did to, as part of my fantasy writing, I wanted to write for children a fable, and St. Patrick's Day is my daughter's favorite holiday. So I wrote about a little girl leprechaun rewriting a fable that usually only included drunk old men or boys, So I'm like, well, it's a myth. It's a fable. I can redefine it for the modern era. There's no stories about little girl leprechauns. So I wrote it to inspire kids, and I made her best friend with a disability. She only has one arm, and her best friend Emily has stood by her father's side and learned how to make shoes all this time. So she kind of shows this little leprechaun girl how to make shoes, and it's kind of, it's kind of one of those stories that helps inspire kids and children with disabilities, immigrant kids, refugees of war. My big thing is I like to support UNICEF and child refugees of war that don't have any parents. And so all of my proceeds from that book, I donate to
Oh, that's nice.
UNICEF. So
That's great.
so I don't do anything from that. So it's not that it's a love-hate relationship type thing. I love that it's doing so well, and I am totally fine with donating everything from that book to UNICEF. It's just I don't see myself as a children's book author first, So it kind of threw me a little bit, and it still kind of nags at me. It's kind of like when you're when you love playing a certain type of music. You're a musician, so I'll go there with you. When you like playing a certain type of music, a certain style, but you find out that all of a sudden you played a country music thing and you're a rock star, you like playing rock music, and you play a country music song as a lark, and all of a sudden it becomes like an overnight sensation or a hit, and you're like, damn it. Oh, I'm sorry, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, it's okay. That's happened to quite a few people, actually.
Yeah,
musicians.
like,
That's a pretty common story. My producer told me that the book you're promoting for this show is Escape of the Concubine.
Yes, Escape
Concubines.
of the Concubines. It's the first in a trilogy, and I have a new one coming out, the second one called The Bard of Masagdiva that follows it, and the pandemic really slowed me down. I had like 3 or 4 delays in publication of this story because it's a trilogy of novellas, and each one is about between 125 and 225 pages long. And this one I had to change the outline for the novella and shift some things around. I actually created a whole nother separate novella for what was supposed to be the final book, and split this one up into 2 because it was, well, it's a long story, but the thing is it's like there were a lot of delays in getting this published. I got sick last year in June, at the end of June, and I had breathing issues for like 6 months due to the pandemic, due to the virus. And I got to tell you, I'm just really relieved. I got my second Moderna shot the other day, and I'm just really relieved that that's kind of in the rearview mirror and that I'm breathing right again. So
you actually got the COVID?
Well, at the time I tested negative, but every doctor that I went to go see, and I went to my primary care, the ER, cardiologist, pulmonary doctor, ear, nose, and throat, and every single one of them said that it exhibited as COVID, and the long-term effects from it were common to COVID. So they all say it's COVID, even though I tested negative for it. And they said that they trust the symptoms and how it was reacting and everything more than they tested the results from the early test.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm just going to say yes because it was presumed COVID positive.
Presumed, okay.
And I quarantined. They recommended I quarantine like it was COVID. And yeah, I had something that it's called VCD, vocal cord dysfunction, that was triggered by the virus, and then acid reflux just prevented it from healing. So believe it or not, all it took was prescription strength antacids, and it like after 6 months, I finally started being able to breathe right again. So, but it was horrible, It's like not being able to take a deep breath or walk any long distances or exert yourself without feeling like you're having a heart attack or something. It was horrible.
Ben, we are out of time. Our 15 just flew right by. On your sheet, I see about 20 different websites. So can you give us one that we can put up for people to direct them to your books?
Just put the Twitter up. That's the one I'm trying to promote the most. I have 21,000 social media followers, but I'm trying to build up Twitter because that's the one that seems to be looked at the most in terms of publishing.
Okay, you want to just tell us what it is?
Sure. It's at Wolfe_Ben.
Wolfe_Ben. Okay. All right, very good. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.